Laura! Oh. Me bitch, fight!
Director Jill Kavarkazan brings us Ghost Game. Now, this movie is a sort of haunted house movie, but it has a kind of extra element to it. What is that? So what's the story here? So it focuses on a small group of thrill seekers that actually do home invasions, not to steal anything or harm anyone, but they basically want to scare people. They hide in people's houses, you know, when they're asleep, mess with them, move things around to pretend that their kind of house is haunted, and they stream this live on the internet, and it's this whole big thing. And they get wind that there is this house which has been vacant for decades because there was a quadruple murder-suicide in there, and this house is rumoured to be legitimately haunted, and it's just been bought by someone, so they decide it's the perfect opportunity to break into this house and do their kind of pranks, I guess, on the new owners, because obviously this house is already has a reputation, so they think it's the perfect setup for a you know, one of these kind of pranks. So we have this kind of three-man team, so to speak, of these kind of pranksters, if you like, break into this house, wait for the kind of the new owners to show up, and then they plan to do all these things to scare them and capture it on film. But there may be other forces at work here. So what will happen? You will have to watch the movie and find out. So let us discuss. I think the idea here is interesting and even solid, even though I have a few issues with the initial setup, which we'll come on to. But nonetheless, I think it would make for an interesting and sort of unique setup for a movie. We have, you know, homeowners in this house, which has got this reputation. We've got these kind of home invaders hiding in there, ready to do kind of pranks and things, trying to capture it on camera. And then we have this other element as well. And, you know, how would these things kind of like combine? I think it's an interesting idea here where we have really a trifecta of different kind of elements to this movie, which makes it a little less predictable, or at least in theory, that's the idea here. I think the location of this house is quite good, and I think the movie does a good job of building up a little bit of backstory about the house and the tragic circumstances that, you know, that the original kind of haunting, so to speak, or the original kind of inciting incident which leads people to believe it's haunted, I think is quite well set up. I think the characters are quite interesting. You know, we have our trio of pranksters. There's this couple and this other guy, and none of them are particularly altruistic necessarily. Certainly morally grey, you might say, but it does make for some interesting sort of character types, I would suggest. A little bit different from the norm, which is obviously to be commended. And I don't think the performances were all that bad either, to be fair. I think everyone does a kind of a reasonable job here with a slightly messy script, which we'll sort of come on to. So I have to say, I think the first act of this movie is fairly strong, which is your setup. It's getting to know the characters, getting to know the house, and getting to know the idea of what these people are planning to do. Whilst we are in the house, you know, outside of what can I say that works, is that, you know, the movie's relatively kind of well shot. It introduces like a hostel element to the movie Hostel. Not that it's torture porn, but there's an element here that reminded me a little bit of the Hostel series. And it's, as I say, this house is quite a good location. It looks kind of quite maybe a little bit too sort of typical haunted house, but nonetheless, I think it works for the story. Okay, let's talk about what does not work in this film. So the first act, fairly strong. The second act, boring. The third act, messy. So 1 out of 3, I would say, works in this movie. I kind of said what I liked about the first act, but let me just have some critiques with it. So the setup here is we have these people going into strangers' houses and, you know, pranking them, scaring them. It strikes me as an odd thing to do, to be honest. It's like, how do these people have time to do this? I mean, we actually have some lines of dialogue here where we know one guy cuts lawns for a living, and the other, one of the girl works in a call centre. So they established that these are low-paying jobs. So how have these people got time to do all this with a kind of a low-paying working life? Why do they do it? I mean, yeah, it's sold to us that this is thrill-seeking, but it seems a very odd thing to do, and the variables that could go wrong here, I would say, are quite high. I mean, arguably, you could say that's why they do it. That's the whole point of thrill-seeking. But it just seems like odd and cruel, realistically, you know, cruel. And even when they're doing it, right, so they wear these kind of like Halloween sort of style masks. And I thought, why would you wear that if you're not intending to get caught? Surely you would wear something which is going to like just black, you know, so you can be hidden. Why wear a garish costume if you're not intending to be shown in it? You're not intending to be seen of it. If anything, if someone were to see like that over just like a black silhouette, if you're just wearing like a balaclava or something, then you could just freeze and you're probably more likely to get away with it. But you're wearing these like garish masks. It doesn't really make sense logically. There's just a few things here that, again, I just felt the concept is fun and interesting, but it doesn't really make logical sense. I mean, these people talk at kind of like normal volume when they're in people's houses. You know, we have all these kind of webcams that are all over the place that we just assume people don't see. I mean, they make a point of saying, oh, we'll move these cameras before someone sees them in the morning. But what happens if someone gets up of a night and goes to the loo or something like that? Again, it's just like, the idea is interesting, but it's flawed. But at least it was interesting. Now let's move on to the second act. This is people talking in dark corridors, people shuffling around in dark corridors, and that's kind of it. That's the movie, that's the second act. People dropping a lot of exposition, lots of telling, whispering, sometimes not whispering, as I've said, talking at a loud volume. And some, I have to say, some character cliches start to come out here. But it ultimately becomes just a little dull, that second act, where you're thinking, I don't really feel much is happening here. Now let's talk about the third act, without kind of getting into anything, like spoilers, but it kind of tries to pull the rug out of, you know, from you. But it's fairly, to me, it was fairly obvious what was going on, because they make a point of showing you like videos of other, you know, home invasion haunts, so to speak, and they make a big point of saying, oh, this guy's the master and all this. And it's just like, well, why are we bleating on about this one guy who's not even part of the kind of the cast and things? And it's like, well, okay, so, you know, that's all I'm saying. But it's relatively obvious, but then we suddenly have an explosion of different kind of, I guess, other characters to not try and be too spoilery here. And it's just like, it's really messy. You say it's partially explained, but I feel it just takes like a turn that seems to come out of nowhere. even if you were to believe, okay, we have these characters in this third act, why are they doing certain things? Again, it seems out of turn. It doesn't really seem logical. It's just very messy. And then we have like this kind of somewhat of abrupt ending. And let me just say, I think you'd be very unsatisfied with this movie. So overall, I would suggest this movie has an interesting concept, but then it's just wasted. You know, it ends up being a mix of kind of boring in places, messy and kind of convoluted in others, and then just the idea is flawed. So it's a bit of a miss, I've got to say. I thought this movie was I was just kind of waiting for something visually interesting. It never really happens. Yeah, what does happen, I think, is less interesting. They've obviously tried to subvert expectations. I think even so, it was still relatively obvious what was going on. But even if you didn't pick it up on that, I think what we do get is not as interesting as maybe what people would expect. I'm going to give this one a 3 out of 10. It was a bit of a miss. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.